Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back to Blood of the Dead. I let go of the page. Welcome back to Blood of the Dead. So, I was looking on Amazon for some books that I'd like to buy. I had a viewer on, I forget which video it was now, but I guess I could go back and look. Anyway, they mentioned a book called Graceling, I think it was. I'll have to go back and check. I've slept since I saw the thing. I think it's still in my Amazon cart, though, so there's that. Anyway, I noticed that the sequel to this one is on there for about $14, I think. And I guess by the end of this, let me know if you guys would be interested in reading along with it or not. Let's see. Alrighty. I feel like I was going to say something else, but I don't remember what. Anyway. Chapter 1. April. I assume it's the month. I've forgotten. Page 24. Joe Bailey entered his apartment just after dawn. He closed the door behind him, locked the knob, the two deadbolts, and changed the top. His dog, April, I just remembered. Sorry. A white-brown Springer Spaniel Collie mix. Aww. I used to have a couple of dogs. One of them was a Cocker Spaniel, and one was a Border Collie Retriever mix. Her name was Misty, and she was such a sweet and lovely puppy. I say puppy, but by the time we met her, she was about 10 years old. I miss her. He had rescued shortly after after beginning his crusade to hunt the undead, came bounding from the living room. "Hey, April," he said. Sitting at 45 pounds, she wasn't the fiercest animal in the world, but she knew what to do if anybody but him entered the apartment. For a long while, after he first got her, she'd bark and growl each time he came home. Now she was able to recognize his footfalls in the hallway. Joe made his way to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out a beer. Popping the cap off and letting it fall to join the others, he took off his trench coat and dumped it on the table. He hit the front room, not bothering to turn the lights on. The sickly gray sky brought enough light into the place, and even that was more than he cared for. Flopping down on an aged blue and gray sofa, he sat with his legs out, fatigue filling his eyes and fuzzying his head. Staying up all night shouldn't be taking the toll that it was, but his body said otherwise. He should be used to it. He'd always had trouble sleeping and used to fill the late-night hours writing comic books. Those days were gone, writing funny books, but he still should have been able to weather the night and catch what Z's he could during the day. I don't know if he means zombies or, like, sleeping, but it makes me want to giggle. But things were different now, and the rise of the undead was only a part of it. April hopped on the sofa beside him and plopped her head in his lap. He scratched her behind the ears between each sip of beer. "What'd you do tonight?" he asked. April didn't reply, but only let out a deep sigh, as if saying, "More, more, more." I love dogs, don't you? Let me know if you do or not. On second thought, only let me know if you do. Don't mention if you don't. Anyway, "I killed people," he said. "Lots of them." He gulped a mouthful of beer and belched, then drank a little more. He'd need at least 4 more to get a buzz going, and he only had 3 left in the fridge. For a time, he took what he could get from the vendors and liquor stores. Once those supplies were all looted, he began brewing his own. And now, even doing that was getting difficult because others, it seemed, had the same idea and raided every store that carried brew-it-yourself kits. Are those a thing? I'm not much of a drinker, and by that I mean I don't drink at all unless it's water. Is that a thing? Anyway. It was at home that things caught up to him, not when he was outside. Out there, prowling the streets, taking out the dead where and when he could. Out there was freedom. In here, his place was swimming with memories. Memories filled with April, the girl he knew for only a weekend. It had been a 3-day blip on the radar. 3 days that changed his life. He had never been in love before, and who would have thought or the girl with the rich black hair and liquid smooth gray eyes who'd plunked herself down across from him while he was scribbling in his notebook at Second Cup would change everything. At the time, she had only wanted to get away from her controlling boyfriend, Dan. Joseph then, and April were never an item. That weekend had been a one-off thing, but one that nailed him so deeply that he couldn't help but write it all down and record every moment. What? She had got to him that weekend, dug deep in a way no one else had. For a time afterward, he thought he'd let her work out some of the things she had going on, then, at some point, wait outside her apartment to see how she was doing. But that day never came. Each time he had thought of it, the fear of possible rejection consumed him. I can relate to that. Instead, he found himself rereading the manuscript detailing their weekend together, a poetic memory that ripped his heart out each time. When the dead began to rise, and hell opened its gates, she was the first person he thought of. Not his family, not his friends. Just her. Joseph had run through the rain from his place all the way to hers, the streets too cluttered with crashed cars and panicked people for him to get there by bus. The front glass door to her apartment building had been locked, so, using his elbow, he smashed the glass and went in. Doing the same to the second glass door beyond it. He hadn't known her apartment number. She never told him. So he shouted her name up and down the halls, only to be met by screams, growls, and the sick, sloppy sound of the dead feasting on flesh. Ugh. At the top floor, a little Spanish girl, no more than 6, in a green and blue flower-patterned dress, sat crying up against a wall in the hallway. Joseph ran over to her. It's okay, he said softly. Where's your mom and dad? But the girl kept bawling. The door to the suite just beside her was open. When Joseph peered in, a pair of dismembered legs lay strewn on the floor in an L shape. He picked up the girl. I've got to get you out of here. The girl still cried as he carried her. That's sad. I think I've mentioned it on this channel before at some point or another, but I'm a huge fan of Star Wars. I'm sure you've probably figured that out by now. But my mom, she was a huge fan of Star Wars when it first came out, and we had all the movies, so that made me a really big fan of it. My greatest fear as a child, I was about 3 or 4. Even back then, I was incredibly neurotic. But my greatest fear was, like Luke, coming home in the middle of the afternoon and finding my parents dead. Like Luke with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. I like that I refer to them as Uncle and Aunt. Anyway. I don't know. Where was I? The girl still cried as he carried her. What's your name? He asked. After a few sobs, she said, Lila. Lila? Hi, I'm Joseph. My brother's name is Joseph. I should have mentioned that sooner. They paused then. I'm looking for someone. Do you know where a lady named April lives? Lila nodded and pointed to the suite at the front corner of the hallway. Joseph smiled, but he wondered how he was going to manage carrying Lila and checking up on April at the same time. A low, gurgled wheeze rose up from behind him. He turned around and a long arm with a gray hand reached out and gripped the girl around the skull, snatching her from him. Ugh. Hey! Joseph screamed. The dead Hispanic before him, that's kind of racist. Although, I mean, I don't know. What? And probably the girl's father stared back with a pair of eyes that were fogged over white. The man snapped the child's neck, then bit into her throat. That's really gruesome. It's like really gruesome. No! Ugh. Sorry, Joseph screamed. The man sunk to his knees and feasted on Lila's tiny body. April. Well, he got over that pretty quick. He looked at Lila, her broken body limp in the man's arms. At least her neck was broken, so she wouldn't feel any of this. Limp in the man's arms, blood running over her dress. I'm sorry. Joseph ran to the end of the hallway and kicked open April's door. His heart stopped in his chest and time stood still. This couldn't be happening. Not her. Not like this. Girls like her grew up to be princesses. Girls like her deserved a fairy tale. They didn't deserve to die. Sitting cross-legged on the floor and the landing was April. Her head was bowed. Her normally wavy and shiny black hair was slicked with blood and goopy flesh. It hung like a beaded curtain over the corpse of an old woman in her lap. What? The wet slurping sound of meat and skin being sucked on like noodles became Joseph's only consciousness. April, he whispered. She looked up, a piece of trachea dangling from her mouth, blood dripping from her chin. What? Her white eyes softened, as if she recognized him. Then she went back to her meal. Heart pounding, sharp aches threatening to steal his soul away. Joseph just stood there, one dead man devouring his daughter in the hallway, the love of his life sitting before him, eating another. He didn't know how long he stood there, staring at her, but was soon drawn out of the bizarre, mesmeric hold she had on him by a shadow in his right peripheral. A dead man with white eyes walked slowly toward him. It was Dan. April must have gone back to him and worked things out. Joseph would recognize him anywhere, recognize the fellow who had caused April so much grief. At first, the bullet hole at the top of Dan's forehead didn't register. Neither did the brown-out portion of the front of his mouth. How Dan wound up like that, Joseph didn't know, and the fleeting thought of it being self-imposed before the dead began to rise crossed his mind. Eyes glazed over, lower lip quivering, Joseph cursed himself and clenched his fists. Why do I struggle so much? Anyway, where was I? His heart broke then, the shards from its bursting apart spiraling out in a blast of glassy pain, stabbing him everywhere within. Dan had killed April, had turned her into one of them. Limbs trembling, Joseph squeezed his eyes shut and let the tears leak out. There was nothing left for him. The hope of a future with April was gone. He envisioned himself walking over to Dan and letting April's boyfriend take him. That sounds bizarre. I love you, he whispered to her. He opened his eyes, half expecting April to be normal again and for her to have heard him. Instead, she sat there, still eating. Dan was only a few feet away, his beefy arms held out, about to grab him. Joseph let himself die inside. His expression hardened, and he turned and faced Dan. A stream of profanities raced through his mind and nearly spewed out of his lips, but Dan wasn't worth it. Not even worth cursing at. Thank goodness, because you know how I am with cursing. The second Dan moved to grab him, Joseph swatted his arms away, ran to April's kitchen, and ripped out each of the drawers in the hopes of finding a knife. Something hard dropped and smacked the linoleum with a loud thunk. A rolling pin. Hey, Frida, when'd you get in here? Dan appeared in the kitchen doorway. Joseph lunged at him and brought the rolling pin down on his head. Might have been Better idea to just jab him in the eye with the thing. I don't know. Where was I? Dan stumbled back a step, and before he could regain his balance, Joseph struck at him again. On the third blow, the skull split, and on the fourth, blood and brain began spattering out. Even after Dan's body hit the floor... That sounds like something I've heard before, but I don't know. Joseph still wailed on him until his head was nothing more than a mishmash of bone, blood, and brain. Hard fingers grabbed him by the forearm and yanked him part way off Dan's body. Instinctively, Joseph swung out with everything he had, and it was only when his eyes made contact with the tip of the rolling pin did he watch its end strike April in the side of the head, sending her skull flying into the wall beside them. It hit with a wet smack, stuck there a moment, and then slid off with a smear of blood. April's body crumpled to the ground, a pool of dark blood gathering around her head. April, no. Please no, not her. Not you. No. I'm not good at, expressing emotions? Emoting? Is that what it is? I don't know. He scrambled over to her body and grabbed her by the shoulders. When he picked her up and turned her over in his lap, her head lolled back. Eyes open, blood gushing ever more from the side of her head and out of the corners of her mouth. Rage burst out of him in a stream of terror, and he screamed at the top of his lungs until his voice went hoarse and he started to cough. Then he screamed again, over and over, until his voice went raw and he could no longer breathe. Joseph remained in April's apartment well into the night, listening to the sirens outside and panicked screams from those in the building as they watched their loved ones butchered by the walking dead before they themselves were consumed. It took him 2 days to finally come home, 2 days of walking the city streets, lost in a haze of pain and confusion and fear, 2 days of not eating but witnessing from afar the undead feasting on anyone they could get their hands on, 2 whole days in the rain. When he finally arrived home, he locked the door, took a baseball bat to bed, and cried himself to sleep, dreaming of killing April, waking, dreaming of killing her again. Joe awoke the next evening, leaving Joseph behind in that place of nightmares. That sounds disturbing. Dead like everyone else. Okay. Let's see how long the next chapter is, and I'll decide whether or not to read it. It's not that long, so yeah. Chapter 2. Midnight Meeting. I love added alliterative appeal. How is it that I could get that out, but I can't say linoleum? Never mind. The only thing Billie had to go on to distinguish night from day was the clock. Long gone was the time when day and night were divided by sunny skies and a moonlit black quilt. That's a nice way to think about it. It was 11:40 p.m. Billie filled her cereal bowl from the sink, gave it a quick rinse, then poured the last bit of Cap'n Crunch into it. She opened the fridge and pulled out the milk carton and began to pour it into the bowl. Only a drop came out. Don't you hate that? You go to make cereal and make cereal. When you go to pour cereal and then you find out that you don't have any milk. One thing I tried, I got it from one of R.L. Stein's books. I'm pretty sure it was, anyway. What do you call it? Cornflakes with Coke. It sounds weird and kind of disgusting, but surprisingly not that bad. Anyway. Has to be cornflakes. I don't think Frosted Flakes it would work as well. She had the bowl of cereal and debated eating it dry, but this was Cap'n Crunch she was talking about. Without milk, it was like trying to crunch through tiny razor-edged blocks of wood. She tossed the empty carton into the garbage bin by the door and went to her computer and logged on to a chat program, hoping her buddy was online. I feel like I missed the paragraph, but I didn't. hoping her buddy was online. ZW1 was. She right-clicked on his name and sent him a private message. I'm coming over. I'm out of moo juice. Be there in 15. Huh. A moment later, ZW1 replied, Yep. Knock 4 times, 2 stomps. She typed, Give me 3 stomps back and a slap. ZW1, K. I hate people typing K, either the letter or K, out in a message. I don't know. Just personal preference. Anyway, where was I? Billie patted her jean pockets and made sure she had her keys. She left her apartment locked up and headed outside. Before the plague hit, if a plague was what it was, the creatures just appeared the day of the gray rain. She used to go for late-night walks all the time. It was part of her pre-bed ritual, a time to clear her head and just have some alone time before coming back home and falling asleep. Nowadays, late-night walks were done only out of necessity, and though, right now, she couldn't call a milk run a matter of life or death, she could really use the company. It had been at least a month, if not longer, since she last saw anybody. All her communication was done online, and it had been equally long since she'd heard another human's voice, seeing as how the phone lines were no longer in service. She didn't have a mic or headset for her computer. I wonder if you could pick one up. The night air chilled her, the canopy of gray clouds that covered the earth having completely thrown the planet's climate into a state of perpetual fall. That part doesn't sound so bad. Fall's my favorite season. Where was I? It should be winter right now, but instead the grass, though dead and withered from lack of sunlight and water, was still out. The trees were mere skeletons of their previous forms, bushes and shrubs, cold and lifeless. Just dry, crooked branches crisscrossing this way and that. The clouds above blocked everything. No rain, no snow, the air dry and always cool. I hate that feeling, though. Billie often wondered what might happen should the clouds either dissipate or give way. Had the rain or snow gathered on top of them and lay there dormant, waiting to fall and blanket the earth? And if it did fall, what kind of storm would it be? Surely nothing could be worse than what was happening right now. Then again, what moisture that could be up there could be enough to wipe the remnant of humanity off the planet. Sorry, it just awkwardly interpreted, I guess, that sentence. There was no one alive to give answers. Not anymore. For a time, each country's military rose to fight off the dead, and for a time each one fell at the hands of the creatures roaming the earth. Billie stopped walking down the sidewalk as a thought hit her. One that she was surprised she hadn't thought of until now. They need human flesh. They need to eat human flesh to survive. They outnumber us at least 100 to 1. There's not enough of us to go around. You'd think most of them would have starved to death by now. Then again, she couldn't claim to know how the undead's biology worked, and how frequently they needed to feed despite the ravenous appetites they exhibited. They could very well be like bears going into hibernation, or camels about to wander in the desert and store the sustenance they needed somewhere in their bodies, rationing it until their stores could be refilled. The thought made her shudder. That's a good question. She kept her eyes peeled in the dark. The dead suckers were silent. You had to be very quiet in order to hear them approach. The way they dragged their feet, the lack of weight on their footfalls, made them almost impossible to detect if you weren't paying attention. Nothing but the rush of the wind blowing past her ears made any sound. Like many other things, the days of hearing sirens whir up in the distance were gone. Same with the screams that used to launch into the air by the minute. She glanced behind her. The sidewalk was clear. All seemed to be well up front and on the sides, too. But looks can be deceiving. Soon she was at ZW1's apartment building. All the windows to the red brick building were boarded up. Same with the glass of the front door and the window panes that ran up either side of it. Billie approached the front door. Z1 should be just on the other side, unless the idiot got sidetracked again. She hoped not. To wait out here in the dark. She leaned over the railing next to the front door and pulled out the 1-foot square piece of pressboard hiding behind the branches of the skeletal bush alongside it. She dropped the board onto the stone step, knocked on the boarded-up door 4 times, then pounded her heels twice on the pressboard. Thwack, thwack. I don't think that would be the sound effect. Oh well. From inside, foomp, foomp, foomp. That's the best I've got. Then against the inside of the wooden door, slack. I think that one actually works. After the metallic jiggling of chains from inside, the door opened a crack. Then all the way. Des Nottingham stood before her, a hatchet at the ready. I don't know why you do that, she said as she dumped the pressboard back in the bush and went in. What? Open the stupid door just a scotch, then all the way. What? Oh, just a scotch. Okay, gotcha. You think those brain-dead idiots know that we write to each other as our secret code? We change it every time, Des. He lowered the hatchet and rested, there we go, it against his scrawny leg as, with the other hand, he locked and chained the front door once she was in. Yeah, but nothing, she said, and moved past him to the stairs leading to the basement. Hey, you think you can just come here for some milk, then treat me like puke? Billie kept walking and didn't reply. She stopped in front of the door to his suite, crossed her arms, and tapped her foot impatiently. Des's thin and pasty face was hard as he neared her, but the closer he got, the more his expression lightened, and that dorky smile of his crept up onto his face. You're impossible, Billie. Has anyone ever told you that? Just my boyfriend before he died. Nice, Des said and let her in. Billie went immediately to the refrigerator, opened it, and scanned the shelves. They were bare save for an old container of mustard, a couple soft-looking carrots, a bag of crackers, and a thin 1-liter carton of milk. She stomped her foot. What? Des asked and came up beside her, his chest bumping into her arm. Do you mind? She said, and shoved him back. A wisp of heavy brown hair spilled over his eyes. He pushed it away. No. She pulled out the milk. What do you need that for? He asked. I was going to have a bowl of cereal. Barely eaten anything today. I can tell. She turned to face him, just as he was finishing eyeing her up and down. He raised his hands, palms out. Hey, you look like you've lost at least 10 pounds. Probably 15 since I last saw you. You managing okay in that cyber world planet thing you've got going on down there over there? What? I don't know. The truth was, she wasn't managing, at least in terms of having enough supplies on hand. Baths had been reduced to just soaking in water. The soap and shampoo just finished the other week. Food supply was down, except for a few non-perishables and a few packs of noodles. Nothing to drink but water, which, based on the way it had been tasting lately, probably wouldn't last that much longer either. The power was going out now and then. Eventually, the water would too. Billie had friends she could go to, those she met online who offered time and again to help one another out if someone was short on this or that. But it was leaving the apartment, and that was getting to be the chore. There we go. The thought of going outside. The zombies only played a part in her choice to remain secluded. It was just that she didn't feel like going out anymore. Try as she might to fight it, her heart had already begun to give up hope of coming out of this alive. Reason had begun to override the notion of someone coming to the world's rescue. She, along with everyone else, was fighting a losing battle. I'll be fine, she said softly. Doesn't sound like it. Face it, Billie, you're beginning to look like one of them. And you're not? Des's face paled, his already pallid complexion getting whiter. He's getting thin too, and probably weighed no more than 130 pounds sopping wet. His arms exposed by the white tank top he was wearing were rail thin. The black jeans he wore hung off his waist like a pair of balloon pants. Touché. I should have brought my bowl over, she said. Mine must have gone blank. Didn't remember. Want me to get it for you? He asked. She considered his offer, then shook her head. Thanks anyway, but no, it's too dangerous, and you know it. Bah, he said with a wave of his hand. Them guys out there don't bother me. Then with a grin, they're as good as dead anyway, right? She couldn't help but smile. With a subtle nod, she quietly said, Yeah. He came over to her and wrapped her in his arms. No. His skin was cool, his hands even cooler. Come on, here, I've got a pack of mac and cheese we can make. That all? Pretty much, and we might as well use that milk up too. It'll go bad if we don't. He sighed. I also heard from Mr. Shank that he hadn't seen Milk Guy for a couple of weeks now. MG came out here in that red truck of his every week. Shank thinks the creatures got to him. We're running out of time, aren't we? She said. Des squeezed even tighter. Yeah, I think we are. Okie dokie. A little bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but not as long as I feared. I'm kind of thirsty, so I'm going to get some more water, and then I'll go ahead and read the next book. I don't really have much to ramble on today, which I guess is kind of weird. I go back to work today, and I really don't want to. So, guys, wish me luck. Anyway, let me know if you have any ideas for books that you'd like to see me read. I really need to go back and check all the comments. Whoa. Were you guys seeing that? I don't know. Anyway. And see what everybody suggested. Let's see. There was one book. I just thought about it a long time ago. If I find it, I'll let you guys know. Anyway, until next time, goodbye everybody. I like how I'm actively trying to find something to ramble about right now, even though I don't have anything.